Her stepson said, "You've got 30 days to leave." Just a week after the funeral, Helen Carter, widow of Thomas Carter and stepmother for 15 years, didn't argue. David, the son she'd once hosted every holiday, leaned back in his chair like the house was already his. By morning, the mortgage would be called in, and every payment would stop under her signature. She'd been both wife and stepmother. Now she was the keeper of her own home. And when the foreclosure sign went up, David finally understood whose name was on the deed. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. His words sounded final. 30 days, Mom. Then pack up. The spoon made slow circles in her coffee, the faint clink against porcelain, the only sound in the kitchen. Marie stood at the counter, shoulders drawn in, watching the steam curl and vanish into the cool morning air. The house felt cavernous since her husband died. Rooms too quiet, the walls holding conversations no one would finish. The crunch of tires on gravel cut through the stillness. She didn't have to look to know whose car it was. She heard the knock, 2 taps, pause, 1 more. David's rhythm. He stepped into the kitchen without waiting for her to call him in, moving with a sort of careful gravity. His hands were stuffed into his jacket pockets, his gaze soft but fixed. 30 days, Mom, he said, voice almost gentle. Then pack up. The words landed like stones in a pond, spreading ripples she couldn't stop. She stared at him, the mug warm against her palms, unable to find her own voice. 30 days, he repeated, like he was offering her a kindness by being clear. His eyes were sympathetic, but there was something steeled underneath, a resolve that wasn't going to bend. Marie's throat tightened. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She only nodded once, as if she'd just been handed the weather report for a storm already on the horizon. He lingered a moment longer, scanning the room as if cataloging it. Then, without another word, he turned toward the front door and let himself out. The silence he left behind was different, heavier, sharper at the edges. She stood there until the coffee went cold in her hand. Marie set the mug down and reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered over the contacts before pressing Linda's name. No call, just a message. He's serious. The 3 dots blinked for a long time before disappearing. No reply yet. She moved slowly through the house after that, touching the backs of chairs, straightening a picture frame. The air felt thinner, like it was already being emptied out ahead of her. Panic threatened to break through the surface of her composure. She swallowed it down, breathing through her nose until her heartbeat slowed. Outwardly, she'd keep her calm. Inside, the current was already pulling. By the time the clock edged past noon, she'd made her decision. If he was giving her 30 days, she'd use 50. She didn't know yet what that meant, only that she wouldn't wait until the very last tick of his clock to act. She returned to the kitchen, rinsed the untouched coffee down the sink, and stood for a moment looking out at the yard. The late winter light caught on the bare branches, silver against the gray sky. She told herself she'd find a way through this, the same way she'd found her way through everything else these past months, one small choice at a time. A car passed on the road outside, the tires hissing over damp asphalt. The sound faded, replaced by the low hum of the refrigerator. Then came the rattle of the mailbox lid snapping shut. Marie crossed the front hall and opened the door. A stack of envelopes leaned at an angle inside the metal box. She brought them in, setting them on the hallway table, sorting quickly through the usual bills and flyers. Her hand stilled on a large manila envelope, thick, official, stamped with the emblem of the county clerk's office. Her stomach dipped as she tore the seal. Inside, white pages folded neatly in thirds slid into her hand. The first sheet bore bold black type at the top. Notice of foreclosure sale. Her eyes skimmed down the page. Auction date. Legal description. Amount past due. She read the first line twice before it sank in. The date wasn't far off. Her breath came shallow. She set the papers down on the table, pressing her fingertips to the smooth, impersonal typeface. Outside, the afternoon light was already thinning, shadows stretching long across the lawn. Inside, the air seemed to shift, like the house itself was holding its breath. That afternoon, foreclosure papers arrive in the mail. In bold letters, foreclosure auction date, 2 months away. Marie sat at the hallway table, The manila envelope open beside her. She smoothed the creases from the first page, though her hands were already trembling. The black type shouted even though it was silent. Foreclosure auction date, 2 months away. Her eyes drifted lower. A column of numbers, outstanding balance, fees, interest. Then halfway down David's name, stamped bold, clean, and indisputable claimant. Her stomach turned. This wasn't a bank acting alone. He had made it official. She reached for the phone on the table, thumb hovering over David's number. She pressed call. The line rang twice, then clicked to voicemail. She hung up before the tone, tried again, straight to voicemail this time. Marie set the phone down with more force than necessary. The house around her seemed to listen in, holding every sound she made. She let her gaze wander toward the living room archway. In the late daylight, the furniture's edges were softened, as though the house itself was trying to be kind. This had been her husband's domain. He'd spent years sketching its bones, marking each stud with the kind of quiet precision that made him hum under his breath. Every board, every hinge was chosen by his hand. She could still remember the smell of fresh pine the year they moved in, the way they'd stood in the empty doorway, imagining a life between these walls. Her throat tightened. The idea of someone else tearing that apart, listing it like an address in a catalog, felt unbearable. The front door opened without a knock. Linda's voice carried from the entry. "You didn't answer my text, so I came over." Marie folded the paper in half before her friend could see the details. But Linda was quicker than that. Her eyes flicked to the envelope and back to Marie's face. "It's bad, isn't it?" Marie exhaled slowly. 2 months. Linda stepped closer, reading what she could without asking. "You need a housing counselor, someone who can walk you through options before this gets any closer." "I don't want strangers digging through my life," Marie said sharper than she meant. "I'm not." She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. Linda didn't flinch. "You're not weak, Marie. You're in a fight. There's a difference." But the word help still burned in Marie's ears. She hated the idea of it. Asking meant admitting she was standing on uneven ground. It meant letting someone else map out the path she should take in the home she had once claimed with certainty. She turned toward the kitchen, buying herself the space to put water on the stove. "I'll think about it." Linda followed, leaning on the counter. "Think fast. Foreclosure dates don't care about pride." The kettle began to hum. Marie kept her back to her friend, staring at the pale rectangle of sunlight across the counter. The truth was, it wasn't only the house she feared losing. It was the way the walls held her husband's voice. The worn spots on the floor that matched his step. The smell of cedar from the chest he'd built in the bedroom. If the house went, the echoes would go with it. They drank tea at the table, not saying much. When Linda finally left, the shadows had lengthened across the lawn, the world outside sliding toward night. Marie washed the cups, set them upside down to dry, and stood for a while with her hands braced on the sink. It was then she heard it, muffled but distinct from somewhere beyond the open kitchen window. A man's voice, low and measured, carrying just enough for certain words to find her. "Yes, the foreclosure. I want it clean. No delays." She froze. David's voice, talking to a lawyer. That evening she hears David talking to a lawyer. "He blocked my number minutes after the call." The next morning, Marie stood in the living room, arms folded, watching the bare branches sway beyond the front window. Across the street, David leaned against his car, phone pressed to his ear. The wind caught fragments of his voice and carried them to her. "She's too slow. I can do it myself." Marie's jaw tightened. Her fingers curled around the edge of the curtain, holding it back just enough to see his profile. He spoke with the same calm authority her husband once had when negotiating contracts, but now it was directed against her. She moved to the kitchen, grabbed her phone, and dialed. The call rang once before going to voicemail. She hung up and redialed immediately. This time the tone didn't even sound. A flat, instant disconnect. Her stomach sank. She opened her contacts, tried his number again. Call failed, text messages wouldn't send. The little blue bubbles hung mid-air, unresolved, then disappeared entirely. She opened her social media apps, searching for his profile. Gone. All of it. Every account, every thread of connection blocked. The stillness in the kitchen pressed in. She rested the phone on the counter, palms flat, forcing herself to breathe. The initial panic rose fast, hot and dizzying. She fought it back. If David was closing every door, she would have to find another way in. She pulled her laptop from the corner of the dining table and signed into her bank account. The familiar interface steadied her for a moment, until she saw the transactions. Mortgage payments were still being pulled, automatically, every month. Her account had been bleeding steadily toward a house she was apparently losing anyway. She scrolled back 6 months, each debit marked with the mortgage company's name. That account was hers alone. Her paycheck deposits, her savings transfers. David's name was nowhere on the signature card. She called Linda. When her friend answered, Marie skipped pleasantries. The mortgage payment is still coming from my account. That's good, isn't it? Linda's voice was cautious. It's good if the bank recognizes it. Maurice, but if David's name is on the claim, they might not care who's been paying. Check your account documents. You told me you never added him. I didn't, Marie said, pulling a worn folder from the filing cabinet by the desk. Inside were photocopies of the original forms, her own neat signature on each one, no one else's. Then the money's yours, the payments are yours, and you've got proof. Marie traced her finger along the ink of her name. Proof, yes. But proof wasn't always protection. Not when the person across from you was willing to bulldoze boundaries and rewrite history. She leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. Fighting him meant involving strangers, lawyers, judges, maybe reporters if it turned ugly. It meant dragging the fight into rooms where people would look at her and wonder if grief had made her too fragile to defend herself. Isolation was David's best weapon. She could already feel it working, each unanswered call another inch between them. By dusk, she'd made a choice. She wasn't going to let him walk into her home unannounced again. She double-checked every latch, turned the locks, and set the security bar behind the back door. In the quiet, she stood in the middle of the living room, listening to the house breathe. The thought wasn't about safety alone. It was about staking her place, making a quiet declaration to herself. This is still mine. Hours later, she sat in bed with the lamp on low, a book open in her lap though she hadn't read a page in 20 minutes. The digital clock glowed 12:07 when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Bank alert, mortgage payment reversed. Marie's eyes locked on the screen. The funds, thousands, had been pulled back into her account. No explanation, no authorization from her. Her pulse thudded in her ears. At midnight, the bank account shows a reversal, mortgage payment refunded. The money was gone, returned, proof of someone cashing out control. The alert on her phone still glowed against the dark of the bedroom. The numbers crisp and undeniable, over $10,000 credited back into her account. Not a bonus, not a refund for overpayment. This was the exact figure of her last mortgage installment. Marie slid her glasses on and opened her email. The bank's subject line was stark, payment reversal processed. She clicked, scanning the short paragraph until her eyes caught the heart of it. Reversal authorized by alternate account authority. Alternate account authority. She had no alternate authority. Her chest felt tight. She pressed her palm against it, steadying herself. There was no mystery here. David was cutting the cord himself, undoing her payments so the debt could pile higher. She forwarded the email to Linda, without comment, and added a short text, "Call me when you see this." The phone rang almost immediately. "I'm calling the bank," Linda said. "Stay on the line." Marie listened to the distant hold music through the speaker. Her eyes wandered to the faint reflection of herself in the window, hair rumpled from sleep, expression drawn. The voice that finally came on the line was brisk, professional, and absolutely clear. "Yes, we show the reversal was processed yesterday afternoon at the request of a joint claimant, Mr. David Whitman. He's not joint on this account," Marie said before she could stop herself, leaning toward the phone as if proximity could make the difference. The bank representative hesitated. "We have documentation granting him authority to make certain payment changes." "What documentation?" Linda's voice was flinty. "A signed release form, notarized," the woman replied. Marie felt the ground tilt under her. A release form she had never signed. When the call ended, Linda's voice came through low, deliberate. "He's not just trying to evict you, Marie. He's trying to run the clock out so foreclosure's inevitable. The next buzz on her phone wasn't from the bank. It was a text from David. You were never trustee. I'm securing the asset. No greeting, no apology, just cold clipped possession. Marie read it twice, her thumb hovering over the reply icon. In the end, she didn't send anything back. She'd learned the hard way that some messages were traps disguised as conversations. She set the phone on the table and gripped the edge until her knuckles blanched. This wasn't only about the house. It was about erasing her place in it. The grief came swift and uninvited. A memory of her husband sketching the blueprint at the kitchen table, of his voice explaining why the front porch should be wide enough for 2 rocking chairs. She bit down hard, refusing to let the tears blind her. Resolve came on its heels. She opened the drawer beneath the phone and pulled out a manila folder, the one with her name on the title deed and the old mortgage insurance policy. She flipped through until she found the most recent property statement. Her name, Marie Whitman, was there alongside his David Whitman. Her pulse jumped. It's in both our names, she whispered. It's not his alone, but if that were true, how had he reversed the payment? A second call to the bank confirmed what she feared. The release form carried her name in shaky block letters and a notary stamp from a county she hadn't set foot in for years. Forgery, Linda said flatly. This is elder abuse, Marie. You need a lawyer now, not next week. Marie nodded, the motion slow but certain. Then I'll find one. Tomorrow. She closed the folder and slid it back into the drawer, locking it this time. Her breath was steady. This was no longer a question of whether she'd fight. It was about making sure the fight was on her terms. The house settled around her, its creaks and sighs familiar but tinged with unease. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice, then stopped. Marie sat in the armchair by the front window until the night deepened, letting her mind run through next step. The sound of the mail slot snapping startled her. She rose and crossed the hall. A single white envelope lay on the floorboards. Her name was typed clean across the front. No return address. She bent, picked it up and tore it open. One sheet inside, on heavy cream paper, read, Attorney will visit tomorrow. Marie gets a letter. Attorney will visit tomorrow. The doorbell rang. Lawyer's voice calm on other side. The bell's chime cut through the morning quiet. 3 notes that felt too polite for what Marie already sensed was coming. She paused in the hallway, envelope from the night before still sitting unopened on the console table. Through the frosted glass, a silhouette waited, tall, narrow shoulders, briefcase in hand. When she opened the door, a man in a slate gray suit stood on her porch. He had the tidy look of someone who could walk into any courtroom and already belong there. Miss Whitman, he said with a courteous dip of his head. Peter Sloan. I represent Mr. David Whitman. She gripped the doorframe. And, I'm here to deliver a legal notice, he said, his tone smooth, practiced. From his case he pulled a folder thick with documents. We'd like you to sign guardianship over your financial affairs to Mr. Whitman, for your protection. Marie almost laughed, the sound sharp in her own ears. My protection. Indeed, Peter said. It's a common arrangement, especially for clients of... His eyes flicked down her frame as if to measure her years. A certain stage in life. I am competent, she said evenly, and medically clear. I don't need a guardian. The corner of his mouth twitched into something almost like a smirk. Elderly clients rarely argue once they understand the benefits. Marie stepped forward, closing the space between them. You'll need court approval, and you won't get it. His expression didn't shift much, just a slight lift of one brow as he slid the folder toward her. You can review it, sign at your convenience. I'll check back. I won't be signing anything. He placed the paperwork carefully on the small table by the door, as though leaving a gift rather than a weapon, then nodded once. Mrs. Whitman. She shut the door before he could say more. The click of the latch echoed in the hall. For a moment she stood still, her hand flat against the cool wood. The smell of his cologne lingered faintly, mixing with the scent of coffee from the kitchen. Then came a knock from the side door. Linda's voice. Marie? It's me. Marie opened it, and the moment she saw her friend's face, the tightness in her chest broke. She leaned forward, letting Linda's arms catch her. He's erasing me, Marie whispered, Linda's hold tightened. Not if we move first. They sat at the kitchen table, the untouched legal papers between them like something poisonous. The morning light shifted across them as they talked, Linda insisting on contacting her lawyer, Marie resisting the idea of strangers sorting her life. But the reality was clear. David had stopped asking. He was now taking. After Linda left, Marie wandered the house, running her fingers over the grooves in the banister, the smooth surface of the dining table her husband had refinished one winter. Each object felt like a stake in the ground, a silent witness to the life she'd built here. She gathered the legal documents into a neat stack and placed them in the desk drawer, not to sign, but to keep evidence, proof. Outside, the day dimmed into a cloudy afternoon. Marie double-checked the locks before bed, something she'd never done so obsessively before. The papers in the desk weighed on her thoughts like a stone. When she finally slept, it was the heavy kind that comes after a long fight, isn't over. She woke with the sun, shuffling to the kitchen to make coffee. On her way back down the hall, she paused at the front door, meaning to step out for the paper. The key turned halfway, then stopped. She frowned, tried again. The metal refused to move, the lock catching with a resistance she'd never felt before. Marie's breath went cold. Next morning, she finds the house lock changed. My own key refused to turn. Someone else had changed the lock. Marie stood on the front step, the morning air cool on her face. She jiggled the key again, slower this time, willing the teeth to catch. It met the same resistance. A dull, immovable block. She crouched, eye level with the brass, and saw faint scratch marks around the cylinder. Someone had been here, working the lock. Not someone. David. The crunch of tires on gravel made her turn. His SUV rolled to a stop at the curb. He stepped out casually, jacket unzipped, a paper cup of coffee in his hand like this was any other visit. You changed the locks, she said, voice flat. He gestured toward the door with his coffee. I was protecting you. From what? From situations, he said vaguely. From people taking advantage. I've got a set now, so if there's an emergency I can. She cut him. I'm losing touch with my home, David. Every day, a little more. First my money, now my keys. He sighed, the patient sound of someone who believed he knew better. You're making this harder than it has to be, and you're making it harder to believe this is about care. They stood like that for a beat. Two Whitmans bound by a man now gone, staring across a small stretch of concrete that had turned into a battlefield. Marie broke the gaze first, stepping past him toward the sidewalk. I'll fix. By noon, a van with a sun-faded logo pulled into her driveway. The locksmith was young, hair tied back under a ball cap, tool bag slung over one shoulder. Front and side, you said? He asked. Yes, Marie said. And the back? All of them. He set to work, the quick rattle of his drill echoing in the quiet street. Shavings of brass dust caught the light on the porch. When he finished, he handed her 3 identical keys on a small ring. These are yours alone, She paid him in cash, folding the receipt neatly into her wallet. Legal, her expense. No one could accuse her of stealing her own access. Not that David wouldn't try. He appeared that afternoon, leaning over the gate. Really? He said, eyes flicking toward the shiny new deadbolt. That's a lot of money for nothing. Marie slipped the keys into her pocket. Keeping what's mine isn't nothing. You're spending recklessly, he said. The court will see that. The court will see I take my safety seriously. She didn't raise her voice, but the firmness in it left no room for reply. He left without another word. She watched his taillights fade, her hand resting lightly on the key in her pocket. By late afternoon, she drove to Lorraine's place, a modest single story with a deep porch. Lorraine answered the door barefoot, tea towel in hand. Spare key, Marie said simply, holding it out. Lorraine took it without question. I'll guard it like gold. Marie exhaled, some of the tightness in her chest easing. This was more than a contingency. It was an act of trust, one she could choose to give. That night, she moved through the house with a deliberate calm, locking each door and window, checking the fresh bolts. The kitchen smelled faintly of the soup she'd made earlier. She took a mug of it to the living room, settling in her chair by the window. Outside, the street was quiet. No children playing, no cars passing, just the occasional sway of the street lamp's shadow across the yard. She was halfway through her soup when headlights swept across the wall. Not a passing car. The beam lingered, slow and methodical, as though tracing the outline of her home. She set the mug down, the hair on her arms lifting. A white van idled across the street, its engine low and steady. The lights flickered over the windows again, pausing on the second floor, then the porch. Marie stood, heart thudding. She stayed just inside the curtain's edge, watching the van pull forward a few feet, then stop again, like it was taking stock. That night, she hears a van surveying her house lights. Lights flick on at odd hours. She's being watched. By morning, the white van was gone, leaving only twin tracks in the frost-silvered grass where its tires had pressed in. But Marie couldn't shake the feeling that something had stayed behind, a watchful presence that knew her patterns. She noticed the first odd thing that evening. A lamp in the back den flicked on at 8:13. She hadn't been in that room since lunch. At 10:47, the porch light blazed without her touching the switch. By the second night, she stopped pretending it was a coincidence. On Thursday, she stood in the hardware store aisle beneath humming fluorescent lights, scanning boxes of motion sensor. The sales clerk tried to steer her toward the cheapest set. She picked the model that could send alerts straight to her phone. The outdoor camera went up on Saturday, bolted under the eave where the front wall met the garage. She tested it 3 times before letting herself feel a sliver of relief. It didn't last. On the 4th night after installation, she sat in bed scrolling through the live feed on her tablet. The night vision view painted the lawn in eerie grayscale. At 11:03, headlights eased into frame and stilled. David's car. He didn't get out. He didn't even roll down the window. He just sat there, engine idling, facing the front of the house, as though waiting for something to reveal itself. Marie's fingers hovered over the call button, but she stopped herself. If she startled him, he'd have a reason to claim she was paranoid. Instead, she hit record. 2 nights later, the same thing. Only this time, he cut the engine and stayed 22 minutes, the steady glow of his dash lights like a dull heartbeat in the dark. By the end of the week, she had 5 clips. Lorraine came over on Sunday with a flash drive and a bottle of Merlot. "We'll keep the files off your network," she said, sliding into the chair at Marie's desk. Together they copied each video, timestamp and all, onto the drive. Marie leaned on the desk's edge, arms crossed. "It's like he's marking territory without stepping over the line." "That's what makes it worse," Lorraine said. "It's intimidation dressed as concern." They boxed the drive and hid it in the bread bin, an old trick of Marie's husband's for keeping cash safe from visiting hands. Still, the knowledge that David was out there, watching without moving, began to seep into her nights. She found herself glancing at the front window when brushing her teeth, pausing mid-step in the hall if she thought she saw headlights sweep the yard. By Tuesday she was leaving the bedroom lamp on, not for comfort, but because she wanted him to know she was awake. The next time she saw his car on the feed, she didn't bother with the call button. She reached for her phone and typed, "Why are you surveilling your mother?" The screen showed delivered for a long, stubborn minute. No dots, no reply. Instead, there was only the silence of his car idling on the footage, and the faint, steady sense that she was standing in the center of an invisible crosshair. She started making notes in a small spiral-bound pad, times, dates, duration of visits. The act of writing steadied her, gave her something solid to lean against when the unease began to feel like fog in her lungs. But the fog thickened anyway. On Friday morning she padded barefoot to the kitchen and poured herself coffee. The camera app on her tablet blinked a red alert. She clicked. The motion sensor log was blank. Not just for last night, for the entire week. The storage folder was empty. Every clip, every record, gone. Next morning, the motion sensor footage is erased. My security footage vanished, like someone decided my watch mattered. Marie's hand froze above the tablet, her coffee cooling on the counter. The camera app's archive, once a neat row of thumbnails, was a barren, gray grid. She tapped refresh twice, then again as if persistence could conjure the missing week back into existence. Nothing. She slid the stool back with a scrape and crossed to the desk where the camera's small palm-sized hub sat. Popping the panel open, she removed the memory card. It felt warm between her fingers, alive but empty. The folder on her laptop confirmed it. 0 files, 0 kilobytes. Her gut tightened. This wasn't a glitch. The feed was still live, meaning the camera worked, but the history gone. Someone hadn't just deleted it. They'd reached in and gutted the archive clean. Marie picked up the phone and called Lorraine. It's all missing. 15 minutes later, her friend was at the kitchen table with the hub's hard drive plugged into a separate reader. The older woman's brow furrowed as she scrolled through the system log. Overwritten, Lorraine said finally. Not deleted. It's been wiped and reformatted. Marie swallowed. That means they had access. Lorraine nodded grimly. Remote. Whoever did it knew your network password. It wasn't the statistics that spiked Marie's fear. It was the sudden, sharp awareness that her watchfulness had been counter-watched. Someone somewhere had decided what she was allowed to remember. She set her palms flat on the table, pressing until her hands steadied. I'm taking this outside their reach. That afternoon, she drove into town and parked 2 streets over from the coffee shop she used to visit with her husband. At a corner table, she opened her laptop and sent a terse message to an old acquaintance, Charlie Harris, a retired cybersecurity consultant she'd met years back through Lorraine's book club. He replied within the hour, encrypt your files, back them up off-site. Cloud, external drive. Boom. Marie followed every step he outlined, buying a small encrypted drive and uploading what little data she still had to a secure cloud account. For good measure, she set up a second camera, a plain battery-powered model with no network connection, and hid it high in the pantry's corner where it could see the back door. Still, the question gnawed, how deep did this go? If they could erase her footage, could they also slip into her emails, her bank account again, even her private notes? By evening she was writing longhand in a leather-bound notebook, dates, times, even the smallest oddities, a mailbox lid left open, the sound of gravel crunching at midnight, the scent of cigarette smoke drifting in through a closed window. Each entry was underlined with the exact minute and second from her wall clock. She stored the notebook in the old cedar chest at the foot of her bed, its lock tiny but sturdy. It wasn't much, but it was hers, beyond the reach of Wi-Fi and password. Later, as the street lamps began to hum outside, she brewed chamomile tea and tried to read in the armchair by the window. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil from her afternoon cleaning. The normalcy was almost convincing, until the phone rang. The screen showed unknown caller. She let it go once, twice, until something made her pick up on the third ring. Silence at first, then a low male voice, calm, almost conversational. You shouldn't have cameras. Marie didn't answer. Her hand tightened on the receiver. The line clicked dead. Her phone rings. An anonymous caller. You shouldn't have cameras. The voice was calm. It sounded dangerously distant. Marie stood in the kitchen, the receiver still warm in her hand. Her own breathing was loud in the quiet house. She replayed the words in her mind. The deliberate spacing, the faint curl of disdain. Mind your step, widow. It hadn't been said outright, but she knew how to hear what wasn't spoken. That was David's rhythm, the same measured cadence he'd used to soften an insult or frame a demand, as if it were a kindness. She hung up slowly, as if the phone itself might explode if she moved too fast. Then she went to her desk, opened her call log, and traced the number back through her carrier's online record. Her stomach gave a slow, sour turn. The call had originated from David's home line. The heat in her chest rose quick, cutting through the earlier fog of fear. If he wanted to play at intimidation, she would play on paper. She opened a blank email to her lawyer, typing without looking at the keys. This is intimidation. I want it documented. I want it stopped. She attached the call record, her fingers hitting send with a force that rattled the keyboard. 15 minutes later, the reply came short and pointed. We'll pursue a protective order. Begin compiling every incident. Marie reached for her notebook from the cedar chest, flipping to a clean page. She wrote down the call word for word, including the silence before the first sentence and the faint hiss of breath at the end. The writing steadied her pulse. By afternoon, Lorraine was at her table, nursing a mug of black tea. "We can't let him decide when you feel safe." Marie nodded, though her eyes were on the front yard. "He's not getting power over my fear." "Then we push back," Lorraine said. They began combing through public records online, looking for filings with Marie's name. It was Lorraine who found it, a district court docket from 2 weeks earlier. "Here," she said, tapping the screen. "Application for durable power of attorney, filed by David Whitman." Marie took the laptop, her throat dry. She clicked the PDF, scrolling past the legal boilerplate until she saw it, her own name in shaky block letters, next to a notary seal from a county office, an hour's drive away. "I didn't sign this," she said, voice low but certain. Lorraine's jaw set. "That's a forged signature. Elder abuse, Marie. And this notary either complicit or careless." For a moment, Marie's breath caught, the air thick in her lungs. It wasn't just the lie, it was the precision of it. He'd gone through official channels, wrapped the deceit in stamps and seals, so it looked lawful to anyone who didn't know her handwriting. Lorraine reached across the table, resting a hand over hers. "We take this to your lawyer. This isn't just about keeping your home now, it's about stopping him from owning your name." The lawyer's office moved quickly. Within hours, Marie had a preliminary court date for a protective order. The night before the hearing, she sat at her kitchen table with a stack of documents, bank statements, call logs, photographs of the camera feed before it was wiped. Each page went into a binder, the kind her husband used to keep for tax season. She slipped the forged power of attorney filing into a clear sleeve at the front, where no one in that courtroom could miss it. Her hands trembled as she closed the binder, not from fear alone, but from the sharp, bracing clarity of what was at stake. In the quiet, the clock over the sink ticked past midnight. The house felt smaller somehow, the walls closer, the air heavy with anticipation. Protective order hearing is scheduled, and Marie's hands shake preparing. At the courthouse, I felt small but also seen. The courthouse steps were slick from last night's rain, and Marie gripped the cold metal railing as she climbed. The binder felt heavier than it had in her kitchen, as though it had absorbed the weight of what it carried, her proof, her defense, her voice. Inside, the air was faintly metallic, the scent of polished floors and recycled heat. Lorraine walked beside her, a steadying presence in her peripheral vision. They passed the security check, the guard waving them through with a practiced neutrality. The hearing room was smaller than she'd imagined. No echoing ceilings, no gallery of strangers, just a few benches, the judge's bench at the far end, and a table where David sat with a man she recognized from her doorway. Peter Sloan. His slate gray suit looked just as pressed as before. David didn't look at her. When the clerk called her name, Marie stepped forward, binder in hand. The judge, a woman with reading glasses low on her nose, gestured for her to begin. She laid the binder on the table, flipping to the first section, printed stills from her security camera feed before the footage was erased. "These images were taken from my property with my equipment before my account was accessed without permission." Peter rose smoothly. "Your Honor, we don't dispute that Ms. Whitman operates cameras. We dispute her capacity to manage them or any of her financial or personal affairs without oversight." Marie felt her pulse quicken. He was going to make it about her mind. "Ms. Whitman," the judge said, "do you understand the legal nature of this proceeding?" "Yes," Marie said, meeting the woman's eyes. "I'm grieving my husband, but I'm not incapacitated. I'm not confused. I know what's happening, and I know what's mine." Peter's mouth tightened. He shifted to the next attack, holding up a form. "The fact remains, she signed a durable power of attorney. That signature is forged." Marie cut in, her voice sharper than she'd planned. "I've provided samples of my handwriting and a notarized statement from myself denying consent. The notary stamp is from a county I haven't visited in years." Lorraine was called as a witness. She spoke clearly, recounting Marie's handling of her accounts, her records, and even the encryption of her files. 2 neighbors followed, one a retired postmaster, each testifying to Marie's independence and competence. Peter tried to chip at their statements, but the judge kept returning to the documents. She took her time flipping through the binder, pausing on the forged form. The silence stretched until Marie could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Finally, the judge set her pen down. "Mr. Sloan, your client's actions changing locks, reversing payments, filing for power of attorney without clear consent, are deeply concerning. The court will grant a temporary protective order to Ms. Whitman, effective immediately. All financial and property-related decisions remain solely hers until further review." Marie's knees wanted to give, but she held her ground. She allowed herself one slow breath before gathering her binder. Lorraine's hand found her shoulder. They stepped out into the hall, the air cooler than she remembered. The courthouse hum of footsteps and muffled voices felt distant. David emerged a moment later, his jaw set, eyes flat. He leaned in just enough for her to catch his voice over the hallway noise. "This isn't over," he said, each word clipped like a threat wrapped in civility. David leaves court, furious, and vows he's not done. Foreclosure auction date looms, weeks not months away. The envelope was thick, the kind meant for contracts or verdicts. Marie slid it open at the kitchen counter, hands already braced for bad news. The words at the top leapt out in bold. "Notice of trustees sale. Auction scheduled. 31 days from today." She sank into the nearest chair, the document spread flat beneath her palms. The protective order, her one small victory, didn't halt the foreclosure clock. The bank was still moving forward, indifferent to any courtroom battle. Lorraine arrived minutes later, still in her coat. After Marie's call, she skimmed the notice, her lips thinning. "A month, Marie, that's barely enough time to breathe." Marie rubbed her temples. "The judge said I have control, but control over— I can't stop the bank with a piece of paper. Then we outpace them," Lorraine said. "Refinance, find a lender, anything to reset the clock, or a legal motion to challenge the sale." Marie gave a dry laugh. "With what? My savings wouldn't cover half the arrear, and David has the bank thinking I'm incompetent. Then we work around him. He doesn't get the last move." Marie tried calling him anyway, more out of duty than hope. As before, the call was met with an instant disconnection. Texts bounced back unsent. His wall was airtight. She spent the afternoon digging through the cedar chest again, not for comfort this time, but for leverage. Bank statements, tax filings, her husband's old file folders, anything that could buy her time. And then she saw it, an ivory envelope tucked behind a sheaf of insurance policies, the paper yellowed at the corners. Mortgage Protection Insurance Certificate of Coverage, issued the year they'd moved in. Her hands still. She remembered her husband's voice. "Just in case anything ever happened to one of us, you won't lose the house." She sat down and read the fine print. The policy covered default payments in the event of death, illness, or financial hardship. The premiums had been folded into their mortgage payments for years. There was no end date, no cancellation notice on file. Marie dialed the number at the bottom, her voice steadier than she felt. The line rang twice before a woman answered. "I'm calling about an active mortgage protection policy." Marie began. "Holder. Whitman." Marie, and her voice caught on her husband's name. "Policy number 4442781. The woman asked for her address, date of birth, and a scan of the certificate. Marie emailed it from her laptop, holding her breath as she waited for the response. "Mrs. Whitman," the woman said after a pause, "your policy is still active. You've been paying into it without interruption." Marie's shoulders slumped with something close to relief. "So it can cover the past due amount?" "Yes, it can satisfy arrears up to 6 months. That's enough to stop the sale. If applied before the auction date, yes." Marie thanked her, wrote down the claim number, and hung up. For the first time in weeks, she felt something shift inside, a foothold on the cliff she'd been dangling from. She filled out the claim form that night, scanning every required document and emailing them before midnight. The confirmation number on her screen felt like a talisman. Lorraine called as she was shutting down the laptop. "You sound lighter," she said. "I found the parachute my husband left me." Marie replied, Now let's see if it opens. They spoke briefly about next steps, tracking the claim, calling the foreclosure trustee, alerting the bank in writing. Marie went to bed with her binder on the nightstand, the policy certificate tucked safely inside. Morning light spilled into the kitchen when the phone rang. Caller ID showed the insurance company. Marie answered quickly. The voice on the other end was polite, measured. Mrs. Whitman, we've processed your claim. But in our review, we discovered the foreclosure file on your property is currently under a dispute. Marie's grip tightened on the receiver. What kind of dispute? The line crackled. That's why I'm calling. Insurance company calls. We discovered foreclosure claim is under a dispute. The line to the insurance representative stayed faintly static-filled, like a conversation taking place in a storm. Mrs. Whitman, the voice continued, the dispute concerns whether you are the rightful insured party. Our file shows conflicting information regarding policyholder authority. Marie's pulse thudded. My name is on the certificate. I've paid into it every month for more than 20 years. I understand, the rep said, but another claimant has submitted a counterfile stating you no longer fulfill the trustee responsibilities for the property. Marie didn't need to ask. She hung up and called Frida Larson. Her lawyer's tone was brisk, the kind of clipped focus that meant she was already making a plan. Get me a copy of the trust deed and every document tying your name to that policy. We'll respond within 24 hours. By mid-afternoon, Marie's dining table was a battlefield of paper. Trust deeds, the original mortgage note, bank records showing the auto payments she'd kept steady even through grief. Frida scanned everything into a tidy digital packet, her laptop screen reflecting in the lenses of her glasses. This is straightforward, Frida said. You're the insured, period. But David's team will try to complicate it with language about abandonment of duties. Marie snorted. I mowed the lawn last week, repainted the porch myself. If that's abandonment, I'd hate to see commitment. Frida's smile was brief, but approving. You'll testify to exactly that. The hearing was set for 2 days later, an insurance board review that felt more like a courtroom in miniature. The long conference table was polished to a glare, 6 board members in neat rows at one end. Marie sat at the other with Frida beside her, Lorraine in the second row behind them, her presence like a weight anchoring Marie in place. David's attorney was there too, file folders lined up like ammunition. When Marie's turn came, she spoke plainly. My husband and I took out the mortgage in night. The insurance policy came with it. Every payment, every month has come from my account. I've maintained the property. I've kept up repairs, taxes, and utilities. I've never defaulted until the payment reversals made without my consent. David's lawyer leaned forward. And yet, Mrs. Whitman, you were under a protective order hearing recently. Doesn't that suggest you're not capable of fulfilling property obligations? Marie held the man's gaze. That order was to stop your client from locking me out of my own home. There was a ripple of movement among the board members, small but telling. Frida slid forward the trust deed, her finger tapping the section where Marie's name appeared alongside her late husband's. She is both legal co-owner and the insured party. The supposed abandonment is a fiction created to trigger a foreclosure that benefits the other claimant. David's counsel tried once more, painting her as isolated, vulnerable, unaware of the property's true condition. Lorraine's testimony followed, measured. She described Marie's active role in every repair, every seasonal upkeep, even climbing a ladder to clear the gutters last fall. Another neighbor submitted a written statement about Marie personally arranging the roof replacement 2 years prior. Then came the wait. Marie sat with her hands folded, watching the board huddle in low voices at the far end of the table. Their pens moved across forms, the shuffling of paper sounding impossibly loud in the otherwise still room. One member finally looked up. We've reviewed the evidence. The claim is valid. Arrears will be covered, and the mortgage reinstated upon disbursement. The air seemed to rush back into Marie's lungs. Lorraine's hand found her shoulder, a quiet squeeze of victory. Frida allowed herself the briefest grin. You just bought your home back from the brink. By the time Marie returned home that evening, the first confirmation email was already in her inbox. Foreclosure halted. Insurance funds in process. She read it twice, the words like a door clicking shut on weeks of But below, in the thread of official notes, a single line caught her eye, buried, but impossible to ignore. Sentiment on hearing record. Board notes potential capacity concerns, subject to future review. Marie receives email foreclosure halted, but hearing sentiment has shifted. The call from the bank came on a Wednesday afternoon, just as Marie was rinsing the last of the lunch dishes. Mrs. Whitman. The woman's voice was matter-of-fact, but softer than most she'd dealt with over the past months. Your mortgage has been reinstated, insurance funds have posted. Payments will resume next cycle. Marie set the plate in the rack, her hand gripping the counter. So the foreclosure is halted, the woman confirmed. You're current, and your title remains unchanged. It was only a few sentences, but they landed like oxygen. She thanked the caller, hung up, and let herself lean against the counter until her knees steadied. 2 days later, an envelope from the bank arrived, heavier stock than usual. Inside was the updated title confirmation, her name typed clean across the top. The seal shimmered faintly in the kitchen light. She traced it with her thumb, as if to reassure herself it was real. Lorraine came over that evening with a bottle of red and a thick folder. You've won this round, she said, but we make sure the next one doesn't blindside you. They spent hours at the dining table, drafting a revised estate plan. Lorraine's handwriting filled the margins, notes about executors, alternate trustees, the names of lawyers who specialized in elder financial defense. Marie initialed each section, her pen steady now. This isn't just defense, Lorraine told her. It's building walls he can't scale. By midnight the papers were stacked neatly, ready for notarization. Marie felt a strange combination of exhaustion and peace, the kind that came from having something solid under her feet again. Still, she knew silence could be as dangerous as action. The next morning, she sat at her desk and began drafting a letter. She wrote it as if David were sitting across from her, each sentence deliberate. I respect the process of justice. I will not tolerate further manipulation. This home and my autonomy are not yours to claim. She read it twice, made 2 small edits, and signed it with the same firm stroke she'd used on the mortgage years ago. At the post office, she paid extra for registered mail. She wanted proof, not just that it was sent, but that he had to stand there, sign his name, and take it into his hands. When she dropped the envelope into the clerk's bin, she felt something lift. Days passed without reply. She kept busy, sweeping the porch, tending the winter bulbs, filing the updated estate papers. The house began to feel like itself again, its quiet no longer an ambush, but a companion. On the 5th day she was sorting laundry when the doorbell rang. The chime was the same as always, 3 polite notes, but something in it made her pause. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the front hall. Through the glass, she saw no one. When she opened the door, the air was sharp with the scent of rain on cold pavement. On the doormat lay a single envelope. No postage, no printed label. Her name was written across the front in familiar angular script. David's handwriting. Marie opens door to find an envelope. David's handwriting. Marie bent slowly to pick it up, the paper cool and stiff beneath her fingers. She closed the door before breaking the seal, carrying the envelope into the kitchen like it might spill something volatile if opened too quickly. Inside was a single page, the handwriting unhurried but unmistakably his. You were never incompetent. I acted in anger, not reason. She read the first line twice, the admission both unexpected and oddly hollow. The next paragraph was longer, almost formal in its attempt at warmth. Let's discuss family terms. This doesn't have to be war. Marie set the letter on the counter, her hand resting beside it. The words didn't erase months of maneuvers, of locks changed and signatures forged. They didn't make her forget standing in court, binder in hand, while he questioned her capacity to own her own life. Lorraine arrived an hour later, grocery bag in hand. Marie slid the letter across the table without speaking. Lorraine read it, then looked up, brows drawn. This isn't an apology, it's an opening. The question is whether you want to walk through it. Marie leaned back in her chair. If I do, it will be on my term. No pretending nothing happened. No skipping the part where he tried to erase me. Then put that in writing, Lorraine said. Boundaries are only real if they're clear. That evening, Marie sat at her desk again. Her pen moved with a deliberate pace. We are not erasing what has been said or done. Trust will take time and proof to rebuild. I'm willing to speak in a neutral, mediated setting. Nothing more for now. She mailed it the next morning, this time with standard postage, no signature required. If he wanted to accept the conditions, it wouldn't be because someone made him sign for them. 3 days later, a typed card arrived in her mailbox. Agreed, mediation to be scheduled. The meeting was set for the following Thursday at a law office downtown. Marie wore the navy blazer she hadn't touched since her husband's memorial. Lorraine came with her, sitting close enough to offer quiet support, but far enough to let Marie speak for herself. The mediator, a calm man with silver hair and a desk free of clutter, began with ground rule. No interruptions, no raised voices, all statements to pass through him. David sat opposite, his eyes scanning the polished surface instead of meeting her. For the first half hour, they traded small concessions, agreement to avoid unannounced visits, acknowledgement that all property keys now rested solely with Marie. The air was taut, but manageable. Then the mediator shifted a folder from his stack and opened. Before we go further, you should both be aware of this. I reviewed the court filings related to the foreclosure process. Marie felt her stomach tighten. The filings submitted on Mr. Whitman's behalf. The mediator continued, were denied at the district level before the auction notice was even posted. Procedurally, the foreclosure was never valid. The room stilled. Even Lorraine's pen, which had been steadily jotting notes, paused mid-word. Marie turned her gaze to David. His expression flickered, something between irritation and a quiet, reluctant surrender. All the pressure, all the notices, Marie said slowly, and it was never real. The mediator's tone was matter-of-fact. The bank acted on an assumption without confirmed authority. That assumption was challenged and dismissed. It seems neither party was clearly informed until now. Marie sat back in her chair. The knot in her chest loosened, replaced by something steadier, not joy, not even relief, but the sense of finally having the ground beneath her feet match the reality she'd been standing on all along. She folded her hands on the table, looking at David not with anger, but with a kind of measured resolve. Then perhaps it's time we rebuild on truth. Marie steadies herself. Then perhaps it's time we rebuild on truth. The tulips along the front walk leaned toward the spring light, their petals open and unguarded. Marie stood at the edge of the porch, one hand resting on the newel post, breathing in the faint scent of fresh paint from the trim she'd touched up herself last week. The foreclosure notice was long gone. The bank letters a memory she kept in a sealed folder in the back of the desk, not to revisit, but to remind herself of what she'd crossed. The yard no longer bore the stake of an auction sign. In its place was a pot of lavender, already humming with bees. Inside, the house was warm with the low murmur of conversation. Lorraine was in the kitchen arranging slices of lemon tart on a platter, while two friends from church filled glasses with iced tea. The living room carried the smell of fresh bread Marie had baked that morning, a habit she'd reclaimed once she no longer felt the need to keep every curtain drawn. They gathered in the dining room, plates balanced, laughter rising and falling with the easy rhythm of people who knew they were safe here. Marie watched Lorraine slide into the chair beside her, saw the subtle pride in her friend's eyes, and felt the anchor of that shared history, the late-night phone calls, the courthouse benches, the mornings when fear had been the first thing to wake her. Halfway through the afternoon, a shadow passed the lace curtains. A soft knock followed. Marie opened the door to find David on the step. No papers in his hand, no guarded stance, just a nod, eyes steady but stripped of the edge she'd learned to brace for. "Hello, David," she said. He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Marie, for a moment they stood in a silence that was not empty but careful, like a truce both knew could hold if tended. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. It was not obligation, it was choice. He hesitated, then stepped inside. Lorraine looked up from the table but said nothing, simply poured another cup. They sat across from each other, the china between them clinking softly as Marie set her cup down. They spoke little: weather, the garden, a memory of her husband planting the maple out back, but the words felt like a bridge they might both choose to walk again someday. When David left, he paused at the threshold, glanced once at the hallway beyond, and then back to her. She returned it. The door closed gently behind him. Lorraine's voice came from the kitchen doorway. "You didn't just save a house," she said, her smile faint but certain. "You saved your voice." Marie felt the truth of it settle deep. She had fought for deeds and locks and accounts, yes, but also for the right to define herself, to decide when to open her door and when to keep it closed. Later, as the last guests drifted away, she stepped out onto the porch. The sun was sinking, laying a sheet of gold across the shingles, catching in the glass of the upstairs windows. The maple swayed in the light breeze, its leaves whispering against each other. She lingered there, her hand resting lightly on the rail, letting the quiet settle over her like a long-earned blanket. This was no longer a battleground. It was home. When the air cooled, she stepped back inside. One last look at the street, at the lavender in its pot, at the porch she could now stand on without scanning for parked cars. Marie closed the front door. The latch clicked, solid and final, safe, sovereign, still home.